Have you ever noticed that as you get older, your social circle starts to shrink? You stop answering every phone call. You avoid long conversations that once excited you. The buzz of parties, meetups, and reunions that once felt like fuel now feel like noise. You're not alone. Aging doesn't just change your body, it reshapes your psychology. And contrary to what society might say, this shift isn't a sign of becoming cold or bitter. It's a reflection of deeper psychological truths. In this video, we'll explore 6 powerful psychological reasons why you start avoiding people more as you age, and why it's not only normal but often necessary. When you're young, your emotional bandwidth feels infinite. You're energized by social interactions, constantly surrounded by classmates, friends, coworkers, and acquaintances. There's a thrill in expanding your network, forming new connections, and keeping up with the lives of everyone around you. But as you age, that energy begins to shift. You start to feel the weight of every conversation, every gathering, every emotionally charged interaction. It's not just time that becomes valuable, it's your mental and emotional energy. Conversations aren't free anymore. They require focus, empathy, patience, and vulnerability. And when your days start to feel shorter, not in hours, but in meaning, you realize that you can't afford to spend that energy just anywhere. This psychological change is not random. It's deeply rooted in what experts call socio-emotional selectivity theory. As people grow older, they begin to see time as finite. In youth, the future feels endless, so you chase variety and excitement. But in later life, you want depth. You want your time to matter. That's why many older adults become more emotionally selective. They don't ghost others out of rudeness. They slowly prune their relationships to focus on the ones that truly enrich their lives. Superficial small talk loses its appeal. Drama-filled interactions feel too exhausting. Even long-standing relationships that no longer align with who you've become may begin to fade. It's not about becoming antisocial. It's about refining your circle to preserve your peace. You begin to treasure quiet, solitude, and emotionally safe environments. The older you get, the less you care about impressing everyone, and the more you care about protecting your mental space. You'd rather spend an hour alone reflecting than spend it in a room filled with noise that doesn't resonate. Popularity fades as a goal. Peace takes its place. From the outside, this can look like withdrawal or avoidance. Friends might say you've changed or disappeared, but the reality is you've grown. You're not avoiding people to isolate yourself, you're avoiding emotional chaos to maintain balance. And that's completely normal. You're aligning your outer world with your inner needs. You're no longer stretching yourself thin to keep every connection alive. Instead, you're nurturing the ones that truly matter. In essence, emotional selectivity is a sign of wisdom. It's your mind and heart learning how to conserve energy for what brings you joy, stability, and meaning. So, if you've found yourself becoming more selective with your interactions as you age, less available for small talk, more drawn to stillness, know this: you're not losing your social side. You're simply learning to honor your emotional capacity. And that's not a flaw, that's emotional evolution. In youth, solitude often feels like punishment. We're raised in a world that celebrates constant interaction, playdates, group projects, after-school activities, parties, and endless notifications. From an early age, being social is equated with being successful or emotionally healthy. The more friends you have, the more liked you are, the better. And so we grow up afraid of silence, uncomfortable with stillness, and terrified of being alone. Solitude, in that context, feels like rejection. If no one's calling or texting, something must be wrong. Loneliness becomes a fear, not a state of rest. But something changes with age. Slowly, subtly, you begin to realize that time alone isn't empty, it's restorative. Solitude transforms from something you avoid to something you crave. It becomes the space where you decompress from the weight of daily life. You stop feeling the need to constantly be on. You let go of the pressure to perform socially, and in doing so, you finally get to meet yourself fully. This is where personal growth takes root not in a crowded room, but in quiet moments of self-reflection. This psychological shift is known as intrinsic orientation. It's the process of redirecting your validation from external sources like likes, compliments, or invitations toward an inner sense of peace and self-worth. You no longer need someone to tell you you're worthy of love or belonging. You already know it. That change is deeply liberating. It allows you to unplug from the chaos and reconnect with what truly matters. You realize that the world will spin just fine without you checking every group chat or attending every dinner invite. You're not abandoning people, you're reclaiming space for yourself. Social media, once a major source of stimulation and connection, begins to feel draining. The constant highlight reels, the comparisons, the fear of missing out, these start to lose their grip on you. The idea of missing a party or not being in the loop stops feeling like a loss. In fact, it feels like freedom. You start prioritizing mental clarity over social obligation. You find yourself choosing long walks, quiet reading, or meditative mornings over group calls or meetups that once felt essential. And yet, to others, this change can be misread. Friends may think you're becoming distant or antisocial. Family might worry that you're isolating yourself. But what they often don't understand is that you're not pulling away out of sadness or spite. You're settling into a new kind of calm. A deeper version of yourself is emerging, one that doesn't rely on noise to feel alive. This isn't loneliness. It's alignment. So, if you find yourself seeking solitude more often, don't shame yourself. Don't force yourself into spaces that don't feel good anymore. You're not becoming a recluse, you're becoming whole. The comfort you found in your own presence is not a sign of social failure. It's a powerful form of emotional maturity. As time goes on, something inside you begins to shift, not abruptly, but gradually and unavoidably. You start recognizing patterns in people that you once ignored. The same rehearsed stories, the same social niceties, the same surface-level charm that once seemed endearing now feels transparent. You start seeing through the act. It's not that you suddenly develop X-ray vision, it's that experience sharpens your emotional radar. After years of navigating relationships, you become better at spotting insincerity. You can sense when someone's words don't match their energy. You can tell when laughter is forced or when praise is given with hidden motives. You no longer feel obligated to play along. This growing intolerance for inauthenticity isn't bitterness, it's clarity. With age, your tolerance for fake smiles, small talk, and shallow connections diminishes. You no longer find it entertaining to engage in conversations that lack depth or sincerity. You want realness. Not perfection, but honesty. You crave conversations where people speak from the heart, even if it's messy. That's why older adults are often perceived as blunt or too honest. But in truth, they're just done sugarcoating. They've spent years being polite to keep the peace, and now they've realized that peace isn't worth sacrificing their truth. Psychologically, this shift is rooted in the desire for authenticity. Studies show that as we age, we value emotional honesty more than social harmony. Younger people may prioritize fitting in and maintaining group cohesion, but older individuals tend to focus on being genuine, even if it ruffles feathers. They become less concerned with how they're perceived and more focused on living in alignment with their values. This often leads to the difficult but necessary act of distancing themselves from people who drain their energy with pretense. You stop laughing at jokes that don't amuse you just to make someone feel comfortable. You stop agreeing with opinions you secretly oppose just to avoid conflict. You stop nodding along to conversations that don't reflect who you are anymore. And yes, it might make some people uncomfortable. It might make you look cold or uninterested. But what it actually makes you is free. Free from playing roles, free from performing, and most importantly, free from betraying yourself just to be liked. This clarity may cost you relationships. You might lose friends who preferred the more agreeable, more adaptable version of you. But what you gain is integrity. You begin to attract people who value you for who you truly are, not for how well you conform to their expectations. And in that honesty, There's a kind of peace that no amount of popularity can replace. So, if you're feeling this change within yourself, embrace it. You're not becoming distant. You're just becoming real. And that is one of the most powerful gifts aging gives you. Let's face it, getting older means you've been through things. Not just the visible milestones like jobs, relationships, or relocations, but the invisible ones too: betrayals, disappointments, broken trust, and friendships that crumbled when you needed them most. These aren't just unfortunate events, they become part of your emotional history. And like any injury, repeated emotional wounds leave scars. Not all scars are painful, but they're reminders. Reminders of what you tolerated, what you ignored, and what you'll never allow again. Over time, your heart doesn't harden, but it gets smarter. You stop rushing to open yourself up, not because you're cold, but because you've learned to be more discerning. This shift in behavior is subtle. It might start with saying no to a gathering that feels more draining than enjoyable, or skipping a phone call that you know will turn into a one-sided emotional dump. Maybe you pull back from a friendship that's always been about convenience, not connection. To an outsider, it might seem like you're avoiding people, but the truth is, you're protecting your peace. You spent too many years investing in relationships that didn't value you. Now, you're simply being more careful about who gets access to your inner world. Psychologists refer to this as social withdrawal by learned experience. It's not a condition, it's a coping strategy. When you've experienced emotional harm in the past, your brain builds a kind of filter. It doesn't stop you from connecting with others, it just slows you down long enough to ask, is this safe? Is this worth it? That extra pause isn't fear, it's wisdom. It's not that you no longer believe in people, it's that you now recognize red flags sooner. You trust your instincts more. And you understand that saying no is not rude, it's necessary. You might take longer to build trust now. You might pass on social events that once felt exciting. But it's not avoidance for avoidance's sake, it's intention. You're not isolating yourself out of bitterness. You're making decisions based on lived experience. You've seen what happens when you ignore your gut. You felt the sting of being vulnerable with the wrong person. So now you move with care. You no longer offer your time or energy to everyone, and that's not selfish. That's self-respect. In this phase of life, boundaries become your best friend. They're not walls to keep people out, they're gates you control. And you've earned the right to be the gatekeeper. So, if your social circle has gotten smaller, or your tolerance for certain dynamics has disappeared, don't question your instincts. Honor them. You're not shutting down, you're showing up for yourself in a way you never have before. And that's growth. When you're younger, socializing often feels like a duty. You say yes to invitations you'd rather decline. You show up to gatherings even when you're exhausted. You engage in conversations that don't interest you simply because you feel it's polite. There's a quiet pressure to maintain appearances, to keep friendships alive even when they no longer feed your soul. And you go along with it because that's what everyone does. There's an unspoken belief that being busy, surrounded by people, and constantly reachable is a sign of being emotionally well-adjusted. Solitude, in that context, feels suspect. Too much of it, and people start to worry. But as you age, that narrative begins to crack. You start to notice how drained you feel after certain conversations, how your mood dips after spending time in chaotic, loud, or emotionally disorganized environments. You begin to identify a pattern. Not every interaction is worth your energy. You don't have the same appetite for social clutter. You don't need to be everywhere or talk to everyone to feel connected. You've tasted peace, and you've realized just how rare and valuable it is. And once you've experienced real mental stillness, it becomes something sacred. You begin to protect it. This shift isn't about disliking people, it's about choosing yourself. It's about recognizing that your time and emotional energy are finite. You no longer want to spend your limited hours on relationships or settings that feel heavy, performative, or unbalanced. You begin practicing something psychologists call goal-directed avoidance, a conscious decision to avoid people, places, or situations that disrupt your internal stability. not out of fear or anxiety, but out of a strong desire to preserve peace. Peace becomes the goal. Avoidance becomes the tool. You'd rather cancel a lunch than sit through forced small talk. You'd rather stay home in silence than engage in gossip or mindless chatter. You no longer feel the need to explain why you're not coming. You just don't go, and that's enough. To others, this might look like you're growing distant or even antisocial. But inside, you feel more centered than ever. You're not isolating, you're curating. You're not running away, you're choosing alignment. And every no you offer to others is a yes to your own well-being. As you mature, you stop seeing boundaries as rude. You start seeing them as necessary. Protecting your mental space is no longer a luxury, it's a form of self-respect. You don't owe your presence to anyone, and the people who truly value you will understand that. So, if you're turning down more invitations or stepping back from certain relationships, don't feel guilty. You're not withdrawing from life. You're stepping into a life that finally honors your peace. The biggest realization that often strikes as we grow older is the awareness that time is no longer limitless. When you're young, it feels like there's an endless supply of days, opportunities, and relationships. You say yes to everything because you believe you can afford to. You stretch yourself thin, jumping from one gathering to the next, maintaining dozens of connections, some of which barely touch the surface. But as the years go by, your perspective shifts. You stop counting time in hours or minutes and start measuring it in meaning. How meaningful is this day? This conversation? This relationship? That change in mindset transforms the way you live. You begin to notice how precious your time really is. Every moment spent in an unfulfilling relationship or on an empty interaction starts to feel like a withdrawal from a limited emotional bank account. You no longer want to be where your soul isn't fed. The people who once brought excitement may now bring anxiety. The events you once said yes to for the sake of politeness now feel like noise. With age comes a sharper lens, one that cuts through obligation and filters for value. You're not becoming distant. You're becoming intentional. This isn't about cutting people off coldly. It's about a quiet, firm acknowledgement. Not everyone or everything deserves your time anymore. You begin to evaluate relationships not based on how long you've known someone, but on how deeply they connect with you now. Do they support your growth? Do they respect your boundaries? Do they leave you feeling nourished or drained? If the answers aren't aligned with your well-being, you start stepping back, not with resentment, but with clarity. Mortality becomes real, not in a morbid sense, but in a motivating one. You realize you won't live forever, that you can't waste years entertaining situations that don't evolve. You stop people-pleasing not out of rebellion, but out of self-respect. You let go of the need to explain your distance. You stop apologizing for protecting your time. And in that protection, you begin to build a life that actually reflects who you are now, not who you were 10 years ago. Avoidance, in this context, isn't rejection. It's prioritization. It's editing your life like a careful author, removing characters and scenes that no longer move the story forward. You start saying no more than yes, and not because you're closed off, but because you've finally figured out what matters. You don't owe your time to everyone. You owe it to yourself to spend it wisely. And if that means fewer friends, fewer calls, and more quiet mornings alone with your thoughts, that's not loss. That's a deliberate, meaningful choice. One that says, I know my time is precious, and I will not waste it. So the next time someone accuses you of being distant, cold, or antisocial as you age, remember this. You're not withdrawing from life. You're walking toward yourself. Every step away from noise is a step closer to clarity. Every no you say is a yes to your mental peace. This isn't avoidance, it's evolution. And if you're feeling it, embrace it. You're not alone. You're growing. You're protecting. You're prioritizing. And that is completely normal. If this video resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear this. Comment below if you've experienced these changes yourself. And most importantly, stay true to what brings you peace.